So welcome to our panel discussion, Connecting Science and Politics, or better, connecting political leaders and researchers. How can politics become more effectively, how can politics more effectively support research? What obstacles must scientists navigate in the face of pressing global issues like climate change? How can scientific breakthroughs accelerate the development of new technologies and products? And all those questions already indicate there are a lot of expectations on both sides, on the side of science towards politics and on the side of politics and society towards science. And those are just some of the questions that we're going to talk about now between science and politics. I'd like to introduce my panel to you. Welcome again, Michael Kretschmer, Minister-President of the Free State of Saxony. Great that you're with us.
Thank you.
Welcome again, Jana Havlíková, Deputy Minister for Science, Research and Innovation of the Czech Republic. Welcome, Maria Mrówczyńska, Under-Secretary of State in the Ministry of Science of the Republic of Poland. And starting from nearest to me, I'd like to say welcome to Rok Sabjan from Cozy Lab in Slovenia. A warm welcome to Mateusz Luba from the Institute of Electrical Engineering in Warsaw in Poland. A warm welcome as well to Dr. Sarka Kabadova-Weissova from the Czech Hydrogen Technological Platform in the Czech Republic. Welcome. And last not least, also a warm welcome to Dr. Attila Kangi from the Center for Advanced Systems Understanding at the Helmholtz-Zentrum, Dresden-Rossendorf. For those who came in just a minute ago, I already reminded you of Mentimeter. If you want to take a part in asking questions and giving your comments later on our discussion, please refer back to Mentimeter and to the QR code that is also in the conference app. There you can find a link to this session if you want to give comments. And I would like to start with the researchers here, because after all, politicians are there to help others to do their work, also to do research their work. And so I would like to start with Sarka Weissova. You are Associate Professor of International Relations at West Bohemian University. You have previously worked at universities in the Czech Republic, in Hungary, and Taiwan. Now you are a Senior Analyst for Legislation and Strategies at the Czech Hydrogen Technology Platform. And in your research, you focus on geopolitical issues related to the development of hydrogen and ecosystems and obstacles to the development of the Czech hydrogen economy. So it's a hot topic right now. And talking about expectations from politics, do you feel them? How big are those expectations?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Expectations. I would say, for me as a researcher, the most valuable thing is when policymakers use information and data we produce. I'm a social scientist, which is a little bit different profile as probably most of you here have. But I worked for more than 2 decades at Technical University, because West Bohemia is more or less a technical university, and now working in hydrogen ecosystem. And I witnessed through 2 last decades, how Czech science environment rapidly changed. When I finished my PhD, we had no information about Web of Science, we had no information about Scopus journals, and I studied at Charles University, we didn't have databases like EBSCO Journal Store. Today, all this is very standard at all Czech universities. Today, the social science production or generally science production is evaluated quite fairly and comparable with EU standards. My expectation, I would say, to the Czech policymakers, because I would like to speak on behalf of Czech Republic, I would be very happy when policymakers would more often ask researchers for data support. They very often speak about evidence-based policy, but this is not evidence which is produced based on science and analysis. Mainly these are their ideas and maybe personal experience. And I don't believe this is evidence-based policy making.
Thank you so much. I think this sounds familiar to many people, at least in the German science context, that there's often a lot of talk about evidence-based politics. But if you look at it, politicians maybe sometimes, I'm not sure if you agree, tend to take that evidence that supports their opinions. Is that also your point of view?
Yeah, it's very similar. I would say it depends on the issue. When you ask policymakers about artificial intelligence or climate change, they sometimes ask really scientists. When they speak about society, everybody understands it, so they don't need the support.
Thanks so much for now. We'll come back to that later. Attila Kangi, you are head of the machine learning for Materials Designs Department at the Center for Advanced Systems of Understanding at the Helmholtz-Zentrum. With your team, you conduct research on the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning to computational materials modeling. And your main goal is, as you say, to develop AI-based solutions for sustainable materials, focusing on areas such as thermoelectric materials, spintronics, neuromorphic devices, and advanced semiconductor modeling. And I'm sure that half of the people here in the room don't even know what those solutions are for. But also the same thing, you combine two things that are very much at need now and very much valued. One thing is AI, and the other thing is sustainability and sustainable materials. So basically, it's hip research squared, right, that you're doing.
Yes.
So how do you deal with the expectations also maybe from the media that are there?
Expectations from the media, okay.
And from the society as a whole.
Society. So, let's see. Well, I mean, there are certainly certain prejudices about AI. I think this is the main concern. How do we apply artificial intelligence and the different methods and techniques of artificial intelligence? Do we use them consciously? And in my case, right, we use artificial intelligence mainly to make simulations that are usually very complex and time expensive, compute expensive. We use artificial intelligence to speed them up, to accelerate them. This is how we use AI. And we also use AI to make predictions. So when we run simulations, we make predictions about things we then observe in experiments. We make those more accurate. So I guess once we explain how we use AI, it becomes clear that in that sense, there is no critical decision just taken by AI. So there's always a human factor in the game. So in that sense, it's a conscious use of AI. But there might be other areas, when we talk about digital health and medicine, the issues of using AI become a lot more tricky in those cases. In my case, where I do fundamental research, I would say they are not as tricky, and the societal implications are not as, they are not dangerous in that sense. We use AI to basically enhance and make things faster. Yeah.
By talking about, for example, net zero future, sustainable waste and resource management are important. Resource management are important points or ways to the solution. At the same time, the expectations from the politicians, from the political realms, are just so huge. So do you sometimes have to maybe break down them a little bit with their expectations?
Yeah, so I think communication and science communication is very important, and you have to break it down and you have to explain the work you do not just to your peers, but you have to also break it down and explain it to the general audience. And I think that's very important. So whenever we publish a paper we think is important, there should always be a press release that goes along with it that explains to the general audience, right, to the general public, what are the implications of what we do, or breaking it down. And for example, one example is when we use AI to accelerate simulations, right? That means usually these simulations run on very big HPC systems. These use an enormous amount of electricity. And then, right, we can explain that when we use AI, we make things faster. That means we don't need those big resources to run the same calculations. So in this way, we contribute to sustainability by reducing the energy needed to do those simulations. That's one example.
So far, we talked about the expectations that politics, society may have towards your research. So what are your expectations towards politics?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, there are different topics, I would say. There are different points, many points. Maybe some key points would be, first of all, of course, funding for research. It's probably one primary concern always of researchers like me in the field who apply for third-party funding. There is also the point about talent acquisition. We need, in my case, I'm running a group. I need PhD students, PhD students, postdoctoral researchers to carry out the research. But then maybe one point I'd like to highlight is actually, and that maybe fits with the title of this conference, is a bridge, building bridges. So one bridge, so I'm doing fundamental science, but in the end we'd like to contribute to net zero and sustainability, and we'd like to have real world implications. So we need to transfer what we do in fundamental science to society. And one way to do this, to make this bridge, to build this bridge, is transfer, startups, spin-offs. And that's something I'd like to pursue, and I'm thinking about that. But in general, I think many researchers in fundamental science, maybe the awareness needs to be raised on that point. And that's something where, let's say, they're like HCTR, but also other science institutions, they all have their transfer and innovation centers. And I could imagine that maybe there could be more motivation coming from the transfer centers to the individual scientists to actually think about this option. I think many scientists don't think about the option.
Thanks so much. Mateusz Luba, you're a biotechnologist and currently head of the Hydrogen Generation Technology Research Group in the Łukasiewicz Research Network at the Electrical Engineering Institute in Warsaw. You completed your interdisciplinary bioeconomy PhD program 2 years ago in the discipline of environmental engineering, energy and mining, and you say, the goal I have set on my academic path is to constantly develop, to expand my competence in project and energy management. Talking about constant development, as a young researcher, do you feel enough support by politics in developing your career as a researcher?
Jak najbardziej tak.
Most definitely so. Here in Poland, we have lots of possibilities to develop in order to create possibilities for new employees, to develop their competence and open new roads for them in terms of development.
Repeat the first part of your answer because I was late with my translation.
Jasne.
No worries. I didn't assume I would be speaking Polish before. It's a little safer that way. So yes, today politics definitely has an impact on how we, practically speaking, young researchers can develop. We have possibilities to do so. So most definitely I do feel support from politics in that respect. That is a positive aspect of the situation in Poland at the moment. For instance, in taking part in events such as this one, that opens new possibilities for us. Meet people, exchange ideas, create new projects with potential people who we meet here.
Wish for, what would be your additional expectations?
To nie jest tajemnicą.
It's no secret, I think, just as my colleague mentioned before, it's about financing, really, but not specifically about general support, but for smaller initiatives. Because big centers have the benefit of having a lot of PhD students, they have a research team, they have lots of grants that they can develop their activity from, the research infrastructure. But there are also a lot of smaller institutes and universities that have small research groups comprising only a few people, and I feel that such groups have a lot more problems with sourcing financing and developing. This is definitely something problematic since they do not have fully equipped laboratories and posts. So these possibilities in terms of the numbers of a group, that closes certain ways of development. It would be great then if we were able to get financial support that would equalize the chances between the smaller ones and the big ones.
The impression is that politics tend to focus too much on the big players, on the big institutions, and may neglect the smaller ones.
Not necessarily. What I mean more by that is that we are missing support for the small groups. It's not that the big ones are being favorized, it's just that it would be great to have more emphasis on the development of the small ones.
Oh, and I'll get back to that as well. Rok Sabjan, you're a physicist and one of the co-founders of COSELab in Slovenia, the world leader in big physics control systems and cancer therapy software. But before that, you have been the account manager for the ITER project for 13 years. And we're also responsible for COSELab's scientific North American business. So the word transfer was already mentioned. Transfer from basic research into application, into market products, in your case also into health services. So is that something that we are putting more emphasis on in politics in the last couple of years, but is there still more to come? Does there be an additional emphasis from your point of view?
Hi, thank you for inviting me. Yes, I have a bit different position than the other people here. I'm not in politics and I'm not really in research, so I'm in a commercial company and we're doing professional services like control system. So we are kind of observer of the whole ecosystem, right?
And a bridge, in a way you are.
And a bridge, exactly, a bridge. Yeah, we actually do implement some kind of transfer, so mostly transfer of knowledge. We learned a lot. Basically, our start always was from the academic community. We started as a non-formal, but still a spin-off from a Josef Stefan Institute. We created a company, and we learned on projects. The first project was in Germany, in Karlsruhe. And we built our competences there. So with that, we then, approached other segments, not just particle accelerators where we started, also fusion, also medical cancer therapy based on particle accelerators. I don't know that we got in particular supported by the politics. Of course, you are not hindered. I think what was...
you would have known if you got supported, right?
Yes.
So obviously not.
I think we got supported indirectly. We got supported by politics, by investing into science, into big projects that require this. And I think these investments are in general growing. And I think the problems we're trying to solve are very important. And it's able to build a body of knowledge that you can actually support with a lot of experience. We have hundreds of projects of experience, right? And you can really support the academic community, also private industry with our knowledge. So, transfer is going on. And as I said, I think we just have to, the politics should continue.
Only continue, or do they need
continue and
additional...
expand, working on financing and building projects that advance humanity. And I think this is the main thing. And then, of course, the second thing is not just, provide more money, but also have high expectations of the projects. I think this is really important.
That's interesting. Why is that important that politics has high expectations? If they just give the money, that's good as well.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think the What's important is it's high expectations, not just in science part, but also in the execution, in management, and how you build the project, right? Here is a bridge between the academic and the private industrial communities, because academics are really good in the science part, and they're really smart people, whereas in terms of how to get organized, I think industry can get better on some things. I think this is really important. And one other role for politics is to make decisions about prioritization. Because we cannot do everything. Especially, I come from a small country, right? Half the size of Saxony in terms of population. So we can't support everything, right? We have to choose what to support or enter in partnerships with other regions and countries to start building that. And then, it gets tricky how to run and how to manage it. And here I think we can do better as a whole community.
Thank you so much for now. Herr Ministerpräsident, jetzt haben wir vieles gehört.
State Premier, we've now heard many, many things. We've heard the point of view of scientists and those active in different countries. We've heard about their expectations. Let us start with one thing. They all need more money in science, and that's what you get to hear a lot in your business, that there is always a shortage of fund. Is that acceptable, or are you bored by that if once again you hear the demand for more money? Well, we have invited people who do science, and the essential source for that is public funding. So, of course, it is only natural that this is a topic that we deal with working conditions, degrees of freedom, as well as financial means. That's absolutely correct that way. Maybe we should not forget that science is the quest for truth, the quest for the ultimate truth. And politics is finding a balance between different interests. And that means that evidence-based policy was an attempt that we made during the COVID-19 pandemics, where we already felt that there is a limit to everything. And it was impressive to see how Chancellor Merkel invited scientists to her 50th and 60th anniversary because she wanted to get an in-depth understanding of how things are. But in reality, you've got the minister in charge of schools, and the minister of the interior, the minister of homeland security, and you've just got one pot of money, and in the end, you have to find a good compromise. But before, we've heard that we need priorities, and now you choose priorities because you have just said that we don't have money, but we make science a priority. Yes, but that doesn't mean that we give 100% to one party and the rest doesn't get anything. Priorities means the art of not a fast victory for one part for 2 years or 4 years and then things break down. Especially if you're a small country, you have to specialize. And Saxony is a small federal state. We have to specialize. We can't cover everything. And where we become active, we want to be excellent to such an extent that finally the Saxon money, the federal money, air sequence, and so on, means money on top of everything. And how we put the money to use is enhanced and increased. That's the target. But wanting to talk about money, I think that's okay. It's legitimate. Okay, just one question regarding evidence-based politics. You've just mentioned that during COVID-19, evidence-based politics met its limits. What exactly do you mean by that? Well, there were so many discussions. We listened to so many things as to where do we have to interrupt contacts and infection paths. And I think in the first year it worked in Germany and beyond. But after, well, I used to say the longer the pandemic, the more wrong the measures were, because in the end, we once again had reached a point where it was not only about the government being in charge of protecting the health of its citizens, but instead self-responsibility is such an essential and crucial value. Well, maybe that's not to do with evidence-based or not, but it's about the role of the government in relation to the individuals. Evidence-based maybe would be better if you chose the issue of how do we transform the energy sector? Do we have nuclear power, yes or no? Some say yes, because it's carbon neutral. Others say, but final storage is a problem. And then evidence-based actually reaches a point where it's not about that, but where you have to respect that this country, its citizens, this Europe consists of people with different approaches. And it is about reconciling them and finding a sensible path. And then the political sector becomes a bridge, for example, between scientific insights and the public that probably is not open for scientific insights. And if you told them these, you probably wouldn't get anywhere. So thanks for that.
You listened to all the points that our researchers here from the different countries made. First of all, do you see any differences between the countries? Were the problems pretty much the same? Is there something that might be specific to Czech Republic? Or do you think that we are all in it together when it comes to difficulties and challenges that science has?
So I would say that, we are challenging, we are facing the same problems, small countries, bigger countries, and the scientists and the researchers, are the same, It's an international community, and I think they are experiencing, the same problems and the same obstacles and maybe the same challenges.
So, in answering to those challenges, what's the Czech government approach to a science policy that will lead into which is basically for the next generation's future? So maybe you can give us some answers when it comes to financing as well as to certain strategies that the Czech Republic applies when it comes to science policy.
Maybe I will beginning just a little bit with this evidence-based issue. In last couple of months, we've prepared so-called transfer reform. And one part of this is also, how to use all these data, evidence and analysis prepared and by scientists. And we would like to prepare some pilot projects with so-called policy labs. There should be small teams within universities or within the research institution at our Czech Academy of Science. They could have, direct connection to our administration, and they could, answer the questions and prepare all these papers and materials. And we will see, because we have already some small teams already in Czechia, and we would like to promote their work and to persuade other people to join this part of work.
Mm-hmm. I know that the topic of resilience is something that is very important to you and your work. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit and how that plays into science policy.
One maybe not so comfortable part of it is also about, I would say, the security interests of state. Because, nowadays the world is not so easy, not so funny, and we have to really think about it, who we are collaborating with, and with who we are, sharing our data, and all these questions, we have to address also against our scientists and researchers.
Thanks so much for now. And I'd like to move on to Maria Mrowczynska, Undersecretary of State, Ministry of Science of the Republic of Poland. You're a professor. Your CV combines science and politics. You spent the majority of your career in science at various positions at universities. So knowing both sides, does that make science policy easier or harder? Because, well, basically you know what you're talking about.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the panel. Let me reply. Yes, it is easier to connect science and politics when I know what I'm talking about, because just like you mentioned before, my entire life I would spend at universities. And I was also part of the management of the universities. So I do know what problems we have to tackle as universities and as scientists. This is definitely knowledge that comes in very handy when conducting politics. Not only in creating the politics, but also it allows us to have a feel for certain threats for the science from the side of politics. Because I am able to find, well, maybe not the perfect golden center, the perfect balance, because that's still a bit away, but I am able to grab the right point, catch the right balance, where politics will not be in the way of science, will not be hindering it. Science is a public good financed from the budget, national budget, and in my view, it should be open, it should be accessible, but we should also remember that we should ensure as a state, as a nation, the security and safety of conducting scientific research, both in terms of soft securities, like we previously mentioned, artificial intelligence, so an ability to identify certain fake news, such as AI tends to serve us, but also security of the entire infrastructure, scientific and research infrastructure, particularly when we look at the situation, the geopolitical situation that currently, right beyond our borders, is on fire. So this threat results in us starting to think, how do I conduct the scientific policy of our country to ensure security of research?
Politics should not hinder science. That is an interesting perspective. While you were at your university jobs, did you often feel like politicians or politics are hindering science? And so you see it as your perspective now not to hinder science yourself now that you're on the politics side?
Well, maybe not they hinder our research work specifically, but certain barriers are being built, and that takes place in every country. You mentioned that before. Some barriers are being raised that for us researchers are hurdles to hop over. Those are barriers that result from administration, the red tape, insufficient financing, and barriers where what is interwoven into them are universities in Poland, for instance, that are subject every 4 years subject to evaluation. And it's not always a clear, transparent process. So we as researchers, we can adapt to it for sure. Somebody once said that it's difficult for us to evaluate because we can adapt to anything, but that shouldn't be the case. This shouldn't look like this. We shouldn't be forced to go into all those shenanigans and adapt our way of being to what politics dictates to us.
Ebenso heftig genickt, als es Barrieren durch die Politik ging, unter der die Wissenschaft leidet. An welche haben Sie gedacht?
You have just nodded your head when it was about barriers. And which barriers were you thinking of? Not only the Saxon one, but the federal ones too?
Trump.
I remember an event when Donald Trump got president in the United States, and there was a discussion waging whether freedom of science in America was still stable, would still be granted, and would be as safe as it used to be. And the major science organizations had invited to come to a major demonstration, and everybody ran through the city with a lot of enthusiasm and said, "We support the freedom of science." These were the same people who, years ago, when the question was to be answered, what about research on genetic engineering? What about nuclear power? These were the same people who, when these discussions came up, they stayed silent. They stayed silent. There was no majority in society for these positions, but we've got freedom of science anchored in our constitution, so we have to fight for it. So it's important to do that not only when it's easy to be done, but also, particularly when it's complicated and difficult, then we need to fight for the freedom of science and make sure that it works. There is currently a discussion waging in Germany around the question of employment rules. We have the part-time work legislation in science. It's a very long word in German indeed, which lays down the rules under which people in science work. And that was well intended, no question. But then again, at the end of the day, it's not really conducive for a dynamic system of science. Thank you very much for touching on this topic.
The situation of young researchers a little bit more, because I also think this is an international topic. It's not only a German topic. Maybe we have a very German interpretation of it, but Attila Kangi from the Helmholtz-Zentrum, how do you view this debate that is going on in Germany? And what's your perspective on young researchers' career opportunities as of now? What should change?
So you mean particularly the Wissenschaftszeitvertragsgesetz?
Not necessarily that much, because we don't have anybody from the federal government here, but let's talk about what a state government can do, or what countries, other countries in Europe can do.
So I think generally, talking about young researchers, so I'm thinking now about either master students who move within Germany or who come from abroad, or PhD students or postdoctoral researchers. So this is, I think, a very important point, that universities and research institutions, they rely on them. They rely on people being mobile and coming to the research institutions. And in our case, we are located in Görlitz, so it is in Saxony, but it's a smaller city. It is not Dresden. So there's always a challenge if you are in a smaller city to attract young researchers. So that's always challenging, but it can be done. And I think what is needed are, so besides, we have talked about funding for research, but a very important other point is the infrastructure. So all the other measures that politics can create. So creating the right environment such that young researchers are attracted. And that begins with very simple things like transportation. You would like to have very fast connections to airports. It also is connected to family friendliness, because usually young researchers often move with a family, with a partner, or even with kids. So they need to have a family-friendly environment where their kids can go to kindergarten, right, or to school. Or, very importantly, dual career. So they come with a partner, and the partner, so they are more likely to move far away if they know there are some measures, there's an environment where my partner can find a job. So these are various very basic needs in the landscape and environment that young researchers need. But then coming maybe to, let's say, the researchers themselves, I would say there are quite a few funding options of how to, first of all, right, when a PhD student comes to work with us, they are guaranteed a certain number of years of funding to complete their PhD. And then there are options to go beyond that. And there is often the question whether you stay in academia or whether you move out of academia and go into an industry job. But if you stay in academia, then there are national programs for funding, European programs that help with that. Mm-hmm. And the other point I made earlier with transfer is actually would also be a good option. So if there is a lively interplay between academia, research institutions, and companies, and where spin-offs are created, then young researchers have prospects. And if they know this ahead of time, again, that's attractive for them to come here.
Nowadays, oftentimes, once you left academia, you're out, and maybe it would be a good idea if you had a stronger personal exchange out of academia and maybe back into academia. Saka Kabadova-Weissova, does that sound familiar to you? What Attila just described, the challenges for young researchers, is that something that is also discussed like that in the Czech community?
Yeah, definitely there are many challenges. I would only confirm what Attila said. However, because I am a woman, I would like stress the situation of women researcher. I have 2 kids, and it was always extremely complicated to manage all the issues because we have a two-career family, and I don't know the situation well here in Germany, but I can present the statistics from Czechia in bachelor, and now I'm speaking about social sciences generally. In bachelor, we have 60% of women and 40% of men. In a master degree or in master programs, we have about 60% of men and 40% of women. And PhD, these are 99% of men. And if any girl starts PhD study in 2-3 years, she finishes without doing PhD. I don't like to comment the reasons because it is issue which is heavily discussed. However, this is observation after 2 decades at the university. So we make some mistakes somewhere.
Again, sounds familiar, at least to German ears. Jana Havlikova, what can we do about that? It's a situation, it's the same in Germany. I'm not sure about Poland. We'll hear about that in a minute, I'm sure. But what can we do about that? Especially since we know, and I assume it's the same in the Czech Republic, that people are in dire need. Science needs excellent people, and if science doesn't provide opportunities, then people go elsewhere. Excellent women go elsewhere. So what can we do about that?
You know, I think that in Czechia there is a more complex problem which, does not, refer just to science and to academia. We have problems, how to really, involve women, in many positions, for example, also in the political life. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's the same situation, it's about how to balance the professional and family life, and so that it's not just about nice words, but about, practical steps. And for example, we've prepared a new law on research, and we just try to help, to support this balance. So we would like, we just declare that it's possible to use the public financing for, women or men for balancing their professional and family life. For example, if they would like to care about and after their child or the elder, also of their family members, so they can use the money for, to get some substitution for the care, or for example, so that could be possible to prolong the project, in some conditions. It's not just you have to be asked to finish it in 2 years and then goodbye.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems a matter of self-preserving for universities and for institutions of research to get better in regard to that. And let's look at the Polish situation. Maria Mowczynska, is it comparable? Is there also this strong competition between industry, between business and science? All want the excellent people, and if science doesn't do its job as being an attractive employer, then people will leave. Is it the same situation in Poland?
I think that we do have the same problems in Poland, both in terms of the percentages that Professor mentioned here. We do not yet have a percentage balance between female and male students. For us, it's specifically seen in technical departments, where there's way fewer ladies. But in terms of our country, I think the problem is wider as well. and it's perceived differently. It results from the fact that we do have low birth rates. So we have fewer students coming. We have a huge dropout in Poland, almost 40% dropout rates after the first year of studying. Roughly 40% students, male or female, quit the studies. Those who do finish the first system, so the BA, they most often do not continue their education, or they continue it in a non-stationary system, which means they study on Saturdays and Sundays and they go to work. What that shows is that the system is underfinanced, because those stipends, this financing that we devote to students, social, for the best students, they're not enough to keep them going. Also, the problem when it comes to further studying is what was mentioned before, and that is in the base. In order to study, to be able to study well, you need to have a strong base, not only technical and MA courses, but also PhDs. You need to have the infrastructure, you need to have a base. The student needs to have a place to live, have a place to stay the night, have a good basic academic infrastructure, such as dorms for students, for instance. We are lagging behind here, and what we have in 30% is not even livable. But we're going back to the situation where we are lacking financing, not only for science as such, but for education in general. Like you said, everybody needs qualified, excellent people. And universities do attempt and try to have the quality of education and to have the qualified employee sent to the market. But the expectation of economy is slightly distorted in terms of what we can provide, because the economy expects well-qualified employees that will go to work, answer to the requirements of the employer. At the level of university education, that's not always possible to provide. I admire the German system where dual studies are in place. For instance, in Poland, we're only starting in this respect. Not many universities have this dual education system. Above all, I see a barrier in terms of collaboration between the university and the employer, because for an employer who goes into this system of education, he has a huge responsibility. It's a huge burden on them because he has to take over the students for an internship. But what Germany did in that respect, I think that's a good step in the right direction, to educate a good employee that will be a response to the actual need of the industry and economy.
Thank you for this compliment. We don't hear compliments on our, let's say, reforming our system too often these days. So thank you so much for that. So, Mateusz Luba, would you like to add to the Polish perspective?
I really think that the problems that were mentioned here and the solutions are very universal, I think, all over Europe, because what my colleagues here mentioned before, we do notice it in Poland as well. Often what we miss is support from the universities for alumni who want to continue learning or their scientific development. So after achieving a certain level, for instance, PhD, there is a problem because often there is not enough places to have such a young scientist applied and to find their skills useful in industry or elsewhere. Because the industry is looking for people who are educated, they have 10 years experience at the same time, and they're experts in their field. And then that's impossible to provide. So I think that is the bottleneck.
Talking about bottleneck, Roxabjan, if you look for new employees, what are you looking for? What people are you looking for? And don't you feel bad to take them away from universities?
Not at all. We are competing for the very similar talent pool. I would actually say not completely the same. I'll give you an example. When we were hiring for our US branch on the West Coast, right, we have a branch next to Stanford. So, you know, the competition for people is immense. But what we always like to work with young people, because we also started, my generation, we started a company, we were just graduating. So we know how to onboard young people. That's the best part of how to onboard who. But we made a conscious choice not to go for the highest flying Stanford graduates, for instance, but we went for some very good but not so famous university like Davis or Santa Cruz or something in around. And we looked for people who liked science, but didn't see their life in academia. They found out maybe this is not just for them, but I like the topic. So we really hired people who finished physics, but they actually wanted to work on a real project. This is first answer to the question. The second one is when we hire people, as important as their technical skills and knowledge, or even more important, is the cultural fit that we have for our company. So we have our own way of how we behave, and we like it that way. So I think it's really important to have a good working relationship and people like to work with you, because then they can really enjoy and produce great results. So this is extremely important. The third part is we have our internal education systems, because we know that university prepares them some general courses, general knowledge, what is popular today, trends, but we have special knowledge. So we have internally organized training courses, and we spend a lot of time working with people, with mentors and stuff like this. If we, this is an investment worth having in the beginning, right? So that's our policy towards the people.
Thank you so much. We have a few questions from the audience, und wenn wir über Fragen sprechen, würde ich gerne.
When talking about questions, I have two questions for you, Mr. Kretschmer. One is a nice one and the other one is slightly unpleasant, but please answer it. Which one would you like to start with? The unpleasant one, please. Okay, with regards xenophobia in Saxony, shouldn't the political sector do something against that? Because that would help to attract scientists from abroad to Saxony. Absolutely, not only for science, but in general. People come in here as skilled workers, people who want to arrive, settle down, have a good life, a life without worries. Right-wing extremism is the major threat to our wealth and well-being and our peaceful living together. And of course, we have to add that it's not only up to politicians, but up to society as a whole, because sometimes we tend to, shift the burden onto politicians and expecting something from them. If I may add something, I'm quite grateful. I'm not always against protests. A couple of days ago, we had a demonstration, Ms. Staudinger, coming from you on the entire scientific ecosystem. I think that was really good to see, as were the demonstrations that we have seen of the past few months in favor of democracy and a peaceful way of living together. And this includes the mayor of a little village, as well as a delegate or a high-ranking politician. It's so good to see that the masses of people who took to the streets, so thank you for that. That's exactly what you've said. This democracy is defended by actively getting involved from the very center of society. And now on to the more pleasant question. What is your vision for Saxony and its international science landscape in 50 years' time? What's your vision when it comes to recruiting the brightest minds, developing disruptive technologies here in Saxony? So now you can just, let us share your vision. An open region, an open country with people in good positions, many people coming to us from other places because that's the place to be. This is where your dreams come true and where you find a reality where good scientific ideas result in new companies, startups, and the system reinforces itself. I think in many points we have progressed quite a bit. We see that we're successful, and sometimes I travel to Munich, to Heidelberg, to Stuttgart to see that more can be done and has to be done. And in order not to rest on our laurels, because more has to be done, We can take a look at the economic performance of Saxony, because since 2000 we have doubled our GDP. We're quite happy about that, without additional carbon emissions. So they have remained at a stable level while we have doubled our economic output. At a first glance, that sounds good, but yet we lack 10,000 euros per head in order to achieve the average level of the Western federal states. We have to do more. Bohemia, Silesia, us, this has been a region always that 100 years ago counted among the richest and most profitable ones in Europe, and this is where we want to be.
Professor Mrowczynska, is there any plans to fund more student housing, dormitories, etc.? If so, how many dormitories are planned? By the way, again, a topic we have in the German context as well. When we're talking about future talents, we also talk about students, not only about researchers. And living conditions is also a big topic, obviously not only in Germany, but also in Poland. So are there any plans?
Our plans are very precisely set. The Minister of Science and Higher Education, Mr. Dariusz Wieczorek, has many times over repeated that his goal is to build dormitories for students and renovating those that we already do have in our infrastructure. They were built mostly in the 60s and 70s. They do require major investments. We also conduct work on sourcing more financing for that purpose. In terms of Germany, maybe that will seem little, but in terms of Poland, that was not a bad shot of cash for renovation. In December, he managed to get from 150 million zloty, that's roughly 30 million euros from the central budget for that purpose. Well, we are also preparing our plans for these dorms to be built as well, from ground up.
And also one question to Jana Havlikova. Are there specific topics the policy labs you mentioned are working on? Are there topics that are more open for this direct cooperation between scientists and administration? Mm-hmm. So are there specific topics, was the question.
You know, the first, I would say, task is to get the world of academia and world of public administration a little bit closer together, so they could speak together and exchange their ideas, what is possible from one part to the other part. And really, we are now working on the scheme and on the project, how it could be functioning, and how it could be financing.
Thank you so much. We're a little bit short on time now, but I'd like to present two more questions and then start a final round of statements. And you just pick whatever you think suits you, and I'll make sure that all the questions are answered. One question is how to convince the developing countries outside of EU to act climate responsibly. So it's like we're talking about net zero. But can we do that alone? Obviously not. So how can we work with countries outside of the EU? Maybe there are also countries that are ahead of us, may also be the case. So what do you think about that? And then there is again the question, both to politicians and scientists, what can we do so that politics take scientific findings more into account in regard to policy making? Obviously, some of our audience members were not really happy with the answers there so far. And I'll leave it there and would say that we start with Attila Kangi and make a short round, and you can say whatever you want, but not more than 1 minute each.
Okay. So the first question about the developing countries and making them net zero. I think, in my opinion, a very good motivation is to combine net zero with economical growth. So something that improves the living conditions for people locally. And there could be examples where certain resources in that country are used to create something that, or to make advances in some technology that make it net zero. And that would create economic impact there. And I think that would be one way to go forward.
Mm-hmm. Saka, would you like to go next? Your final statement, and you answer the questions, or you give us an additional thought that message that you want to leave us with.
Thank you. Let me return to the question of expectations, because we started with this question, what science would expect from politics, and at the end, allow me a provocative idea. Politicians and policymakers should think about what we really need in science and what we really need in education. Because I, for example, think that we have too many universities in Czech Republic, and that students study too many programs together. They start 3 and they finish maybe 1. And this is the task for politicians to do something with it, because it can be done from academia alone.
It's again about prioritizing in a way. Yeah. So, Mateusz Luba.
Ja chciałem wspomnieć, że
I would like to mention about a connection between industry and science. I don't think they should compete for an employee, they should support each other, like it was mentioned before in this panel. So this dual studying could be a perfect solution. It would create possibilities for both industry and for science, for developing young scientists. That would be a great option. And that's it from me.
John, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Mateusz said something very nice. And I think one of the important questions is how that politics can support innovation in, I would say, in society. So not just science, but also transitioning to industry. And here, an important aspect is I would say, working with science on terms of people, right? In Slovenia, we used to have young researchers in industry, which I don't think it's currently relevant. This program doesn't exist anymore, but there has been a very good push. People have identified the Engineering Academy of Slovenia that might be useful to bring back this program, just to connect better the scientific and, let's say, more industrial sides. I think this is a very good point, and I think it generally fuels the story or the push how to move innovation into industry or general economy.
Thank you. Jana Havlikova.
So, relating to the developing countries, I could just join the Attila's view, because I think we have to be able to offer, an alternative connected with a good quality of life. Without, this possibility, it won't functioning. My point of view. And, just to the question of the universities, in Czechia, the academia is quite powerful, and it's also about, the responsibility of all the academicians, because there were some, attempts to change it. For example, the law of higher education, and also it was the question, we need more time, we have to really deeply discuss it. And we've been discussing it maybe for 20 years.
So obviously you need even more time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Maria Mowczynska.
Answering to your first question, I think that incorporating countries from outside the EU, it means implementing them into realizing common projects, for instance, as opposed PhDs for common research. Another question was about taking decisions about conducting politics based on the results of social research. And I think what we have to do is put emphasis on good promotion of science and maybe demystifying it a little bit, showing that science is worth it, that it brings tangible results, that we can base on these results. And I wanted to add one more thing. I would really wish to have more enterprises like our colleague from Slovenia, especially because you do see the fact that a student will require conduction from the enterprise and continued learning and continued training. He's not just ready-made material.
Mr. Präsident, die Konferenz Building Bridges hat sich ja schon erweitert.
The conference Building Bridges has already extended. We've got more countries on board as compared to last year. And the question is, will we also include countries from outside the European Union in order to extend it? Answer, yes, it's a good idea to take new partners on board, to communicate to them, because it's our task in Europe to also push forward to create wealth in other regions. Africa, for instance, we wouldn't be able to live in peace on this continent if there's poverty, chaos in Africa, and if people can't live a dignified life in Africa. So to get committed towards that goal that we all have a good life together is the goal. But I am happy that this conference takes place now for the repeated time. We had the opportunity to talk to each other, to discuss what we want to achieve in Germany, in the Czech Republic, in Slovenia, in Poland. If we listen to young scientists who see very clearly what kind of changes we need in Europe and in their respective country, that's a very good start. Because once you start talking to each other, you're much closer to solving issue. And it's also not bad to take a look at other countries, to learn from them. That is all something that I always wanted to have. And therefore, I'm so delighted that you all participated in this conference, that we had the opportunity to meet during this conference. And after this conference, there will be much more interaction and context than before. Because here in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, we want to expand the science system in Europe. We want to have more grants in the research framework program and ERC program. We want to be a community of those who gather. Thank you very much for this panel.